Most monster rankings about Hellboy show him up against demons, witches, and Nazi occultists, but here's the thing about that particular bunch of villains. Many of them are actually working for something bigger than, well, bigger than everything. I mean, his name is Hellboy. A bunch of witches aren't going to be his prophesied archenemy, because locked inside a crystal prison at the edge of the universe, there are 7 sleeping gods, and they're waiting for one specific hand to open the door for them. Which brings us to the Ogdru Jahad. So these aren't just simple villains Hellboy can punch out and call it a day, they're the reason Hellboy exists at all. And I mean that very literally, because he was built to be the key to their cage. So today on the slab, we're dissecting the monstrous anatomy of the Ogdru Jahad. What they are, how they were made, everyone who's tried to set them free, whether they ever actually made it out, and if they were ever finally killed. It's going to be a good one, so let's get right into it.
Who are the Ogdru Jahad, and what is their origin? The lore is really easy to drown in, so I'm gonna make it as simple for you guys as I can. The Ogdru Jahad, also known as the 7 Gods of Chaos, are the central antagonists of Mike Mignola's whole Hellboy universe. They're 7 titanic, dragon-like entities who are sealed inside crystal cocoons that drift somewhere in space, which is a good thing, because they're destined to bring about the end of the world. Of course, there's plenty of detail surrounding that particular destiny. And I mean a lot of detail because in universe, dozens of cultures have bumped into the concept of these things and even given them names. Their other names include the Ogdru Jahad, the Beasts, the 7 who are one, the Serpents, and a few others. The name that's most known is the Dragon of Revelation, which is a direct reference to the 7-headed beast from the Book of Revelation. The main takeaway here is that when this many civilizations all come up with the same monster, it tends to mean that monster is pretty damn real. Crucially, the Ogdru Jahad were sealed away not long after the Earth was formed, and there's exactly one object in all of creation that can unlock their prison, a relic called the Right Hand of Doom. Cute name, right? And that relic, through a long cursed and buck-wild chain of events that we'll dive into, ends up being grafted onto the right arm of Hellboy. So yeah, the apocalypse has a key, and our hero uses that key to beat the piss out of monsters. They were introduced in Hellboy, Seed of Destruction, right at the start back in 1994, and they were created by Mignola himself. It's pretty fitting that these creatures are defined by mystery, because the debut comic doesn't actually show them to you. It isn't until issue number 3 that readers get a glimpse of the crystal prisons floating out in the void. That actually gives me the perfect opportunity to go into where they come from, because we got to know that before we talk about what they look like. And like all great origin stories, it's a tragedy. How were they created, and why did God's own watchers destroy their maker? The origin of the Ogdru Jahad is a creation myth. There are a lot of these in fiction, but this one is legitimately really cool. So, in the beginning, God created spirits, a specific order of them, many of whom were sent down to the newborn earth to watch over it. They were called the Watchers, and they were essentially the caretakers of an empty baby planet. One of these Watchers was named Nun, and he did something unexpected, which none of the others did. He took fire out of the air, gathered up mud from the young earth, and with his own hands, he molded a creature, the Ogdru Jahad. The other Watchers didn't make anything, but they gathered around this new thing made by Nun, and then cast spells, laid wards, and breathed fire into it a second time. Even after all that, the creature just lay there lifeless, as if it was nothing more than a sculpture. But then the sun set and night fell. There, in the darkness, even though no one successfully sparked it to life, the Ogdru Jahad woke up on its own. Magic and fire did nothing. It was the darkness itself that gave it life and purpose. The very first thing it did upon waking up was begin to spawn. I mean, priorities, am I right? From the Ogdru Jahad came the Ogdru Hem, the first living things ever on the face of the earth. Forget bacteria or plants or animals or humans, the first inhabitants of Earth were monsters. The Watchers understandably recoiled in horror at what they'd inadvertently unleashed, and they went to wage war against their own creation. The battle was devastating, and frankly, it's a miracle that Earth wasn't leveled, because that amount of destruction, oof. They fought the Ogdru Hem for thousands of years, destroying many of their bodies, but discovered that they could not truly kill them. The Ogdru Hem were ultimately trapped or entombed within the earth. The Ogdru Jahad itself was sealed inside a crystal prison and cast down into the heart of the abyss, but sealing the monster wasn't enough for them. In their fury, and I'm pretty sure also in their guilt, the Watchers executed Nun. He was one of their own, but he was also the Ogdru Jahad's maker. For the crime of creating that, they then wiped out every last trace of him. Every trace except one, as it turns out, because they just couldn't destroy his severed right hand. I'm pretty sure you all know what's coming next, and you're totally right. That hand is the most important object in the entire Hellboy saga, and it started right here. This creation myth was finally told in its entirety years later in Hellboy the Island, where Hellboy hears the whole thing recounted directly by a resurrected ancient mystic. Just your average conversation on a deserted island you land on after mermaids try to kill you. What do the Ogdru Jahad actually look like? At last, we get to their literal anatomy. So for years, more than a decade actually, Mignola flat out refused to show what the Ogdru Jahad look like. I think this is a damn cool choice that works really well for the franchise because it really shows the growing dread and suspense that's been unfolding bit by bit throughout the years. Just go back and read the early Hellboy stories and you can see the prisons. Opaque, crystalline coffins hanging in space. They look like cocoons, but they're faintly glowing. Obviously, we can tell that something vast and shadowy is there coiled inside, but no one could ever really make it out. Mignola understood the oldest rule of horror. What you can't see and can only imagine is always scarier than the monster you're finally shown. He ran with this idea for years, and this secrecy became part of the in-universe mythology. Nobody, not even the deranged cultists who worshipped these things, had ever laid eyes on them, which means the iconography was blatant guesswork. That's why the Ogdru Jahad are usually depicted as vague seven-headed serpents or generic dragons in art or stories. Their worshippers were basically just working off their imagination and vibes. It was during the island that Mignola finally pulled the curtain back. The reveal was worth the wait, which was pretty impressive because the reveal was not at all what people had been expecting. The Ogdru Jahad were actually wingless and stocky, and they kind of looked like demented, weird dinosaurs, if you can imagine that. Their bodies are thick in parts and thin in others with useless little forelimbs, and they look like their growth is stunted. There's also something oddly amphibious about them, which seems fine. I mean, who hasn't seen a lizard? But there's something so unsettling about them, like they crawled right out of the primordial sea. Also, don't forget there are 7 of them, and each is distinct, identifiable by the unique shape and ornamentation of their head. Different horns, different fins, different crests, you get the gist. The really freaky part is that each of them has an eerie crown of green flame floating above their skull. As for size, well, they're described as being the size of mountain ranges, not just one mountain, an entire range of them. Obviously, they dwarf their own Ogdru Hem children and are the single largest creatures in the entire Hellboy universe. There's just no competition there. Also, keep that dinosaur-like comic book design in mind because we'll talk about them in the movies later, and they went in a wildly different direction. What is the right hand of doom, and why is it the only key? So, Anum's severed hand, the one that the Watchers couldn't destroy and left behind, well, it didn't stay buried forever. Eons later, it was discovered by the Hyperboreans. They were the first true race of men, but predated the humanity we know. They recognized the hand as an object of immense power and carried it back to their kingdom of Hyperborea, where they made it into a holy relic. At the request of their king, Thoth, the hand was attached to a colossal statue. It stood there as an object of admiration and fear for 10,000 years. Then, Hyperborea ended up rotting from the inside out after the goddess Hecate exposed dark secrets that the king had kept hidden, and the revelation corrupted the civilization from within. Depraved cults started up, and they committed atrocities so vile that the great statue itself, with the hand of a Nun bolted to it, came to life in disgust and slaughtered the very people who worshipped it. It then threw itself off of a cliff to be destroyed. That didn't work, though. The hand survived. It always survives. It passed down through the ages and eventually ended up in hell itself, where it fell into the position of a demon named Azael. Azael did the unthinkable. He grafted the ancient right hand of doom onto the arm of his own newborn son, aka the little baby demon who would one day be summoned to Earth and raised by humans, and named Hellboy. Okay, time to head into the hand lore. That hand is the one and only key that can unlock the crystal prison of the Ogdru Jahad. Nothing else in the history of the universe can do that. Hellboy eventually becomes aware of this horrifying fact. He knows that if he cut the hand off, or lost it, or died, or let it fall into the wrong hands, the world would become a lot less safe than it already was. He's pretty much the safest available custodian for the Apocalypse's key, which says a lot considering he's a literal demon from hell. Who are the 7 gods of chaos individually? I think this is something a lot of people don't know because the Ogdru Jahad are often treated as a single entity, the 7 who are one. They're essentially a hive mind wearing 7 bodies, but each of the 7 has its own individual name, its own design, and its own mythological background. Their names draw on real Mesopotamian and Egyptian deities. Let's list them up. Ogdru Jahad takes its name from Adad, the Mesopotamian storm god, a deity associated with both destruction and, intriguingly, fertility. Then, Nun Jihad, who's named for Ammon, the Egyptian god of Thebes who later fused with Ra into Ammon-Ra. Belili Jihad, sometimes written as Bo Jihad, almost certainly comes from Belili, a Mesopotamian goddess associated in different traditions with Dumuzi and the primordial ancestors of Anu. Ira Jihad comes from Ira or Era, who is the Mesopotamian god of plague and the underworld and is sometimes considered another face of Nergal. Namrat Jihad is named for Namrat, a minor goddess and consort of the Mesopotamian god Numushta, the main protector god of the city of Kazulu. Nergal Jihad takes its name from Nergal himself, the Mesopotamian god of war, plague, death, the underworld, you name it, who was himself the consort of the death queen Ereshkigal. Finally, Nun Jihad, who gets his name from Nun, the ancient Egyptian primordial god and personification of the watery abyss and chaos. But we're not going to talk too much about Nun Jihad here because he gets his own section later. These names aren't just random bits of trivia. Cultists like Grigory Rasputin and the witch, Nimue, recite a ritual chant that invokes each of the 7 dragons by name, one after another, and this chant can either be used to summon or empower them. So when you hear all 7 names called out in sequence in a Hellboy story, you know something really bad is about to go down. What are the Ogdru Hem, and why do they matter? We've already mentioned the Ogdru Hem a couple of times, and I think we've been vague enough until now. The Ogdru Hem are the children of the Ogdru Jahad, 369 of them, spawned during that single night when the Ogdru Jahad woke up in the dark. As we already mentioned, these were the first life forms on Earth. The Watchers couldn't truly kill them. Instead, many were left bodiless or entombed across the Earth, and throughout the Hellboy and BPRD comics, they keep showing up as terrifying monsters. They include the likes of the Conqueror Worm and Katha Hem, and even as individuals, these Ogdru Hem are world-ending threats all on their own. In Hellboy, Conqueror Worm, the old Nazi scientist Hermann von Klempt brings one of these things back to Earth and gives a chilling speech about how the 369 Ogdru Hem will eventually come back to wake up their sleeping parents. Their end goal? To destroy the world until it's nothing but dust and blood. The nightmares associated with the Ogdru Hem that show up most often are the frog monsters. Their first appearance is in issue number 1 of Seed of Destruction, but they take center stage in Plague of Frogs. The Ogdru Jahad are working through their Hem, and they make repeated, flawed attempts to make an entirely new race, a replacement for humanity meant to inherit the Earth after mankind was scoured away. But what they do make are these weirdo frog creatures, and it's blatantly stated that they're botched, inferior prototypes. Notably, they're also described as lesser than the elegant and fully realized amphibious biology of BPRD agent Abraham Sapien. So these frog creatures are a rough draft to show us the world that comes after humanity. The largest swarm of Ogdru Hem shows up when Nun Jihad arrives, but we're building up to that, so no spoilers yet. How did Rasputin and the Nazis try to use them to win World War II? Every apocalypse needs a true believer to start a cult around, and the Ogdru Jahad's human servant was Grigory Rasputin. Yes, that Rasputin, the mad monk of the Romanovs. In Mignola's version, after Rasputin was historically assassinated and his body dumped through the ice into the Neva River, he didn't simply die. No, that would be too simple. Down in that freezing water, he heard the voice of the dragon, which ended up reviving him, remaking him, and also binding him to the dragon's purpose. Decades later, the Nazis came calling. Desperate, they'd turned to occultism and recruited Rasputin for a secret operation called Project Ragnarok, believing his supernatural power could turn the tide of a war they were losing. And so, in December of 1944, on a remote island, Rasputin performed a ritual, an attempt to summon a being that could serve as the harbinger of the Ogdru Jahad's release. It kinda worked, which brings us to the Hellboy franchise. The ritual did summon the demonic infant that had the key, but instead of appearing in Nazi hands, the baby manifested elsewhere in Britain in a ruined church where it was found by Allied forces and a kindly professor named Trevor Brutenholm. That baby was Anung on Rama, the Hellboy we all know and love, which means that the Nazis' doomsday weapon toddled right into the arms of the good guys. Rasputin slipped away into hiding as the Reich collapsed and stayed hidden for half a century. He finally resurfaced in 1994 during the events of Seed of Destruction to directly attempt to crack open the Ogdru Jahad's prison, this time using the now fully grown Hellboy as his unwitting key. Hellboy confronted and defeated him, and the attempt failed. But it wasn't a complete failure because it put a crack in the wall of the dragon's crystal prison. That would become the doorway for the next great attempt to unleash the Seven that are One. How did the Ogdru Jahad almost break free through Nimue, the Queen of Blood? If you know Nimue, it's probably because of King Arthur. In Arthurian legend, she's known as the Lady of the Lake, a title associated with giving Arthur the legendary Excalibur and helping take him to Avalon after his final battle. Mignola's Nimue, though, is a stranger and far darker figure. She was a witch who seduced the wizard Merlin and betrayed him, stealing his deepest secret knowledge for herself. But everything comes with a price, and the price of the knowledge was that she began to hear the voice of the dragon, and it drove her mad. Her own sister witches, terrified of what she was becoming and what she might unleash, killed her and cut her body into pieces to make sure she stayed dead. To no one's shock, she didn't stay dead. Her resurrection happens across Darkness Calls and the Wild Hunt, and when she returns, she takes on a new title, the Queen of Blood. And I mean, that's not ominous at all, right? Now, that crack Rasputin left in the prison wall, the one we were just talking about, remember? Well, during the Wild Hunt and the Storm, the resurrected Nimue gathers strength and raises an army. And then, in the fury, the Ogdru Jahad reach through that crack and possess her body, using the Queen of Blood as a living vessel to attempt a premature return to the world. What follows is properly apocalyptic. Nimue's body transforms into a full-size dragon, and she starts a monstrous storm over the entire Isle of Britain. Hundreds upon hundreds of lightning strikes hammering the land. On the ground, there's a parallel war raging between Nimue's forces and the risen noble dead of Britain, called up to make one last stand. And into all of this walks Hellboy, who faces the dragon in single combat and kills the host, ending the immediate threat and saving Britain. Easy peasy, right? But Mignola is actually very clear that this is not a victory. The narration makes it explicit that this battle is not the end of the war, and that the Ogdru Jahad had not fully manifested on Earth through Nimue. This was just the beginning of how the apocalypse would eventually unfold on an even greater scale. And the story has one final gut punch left, and it's devastating. As she dies, Nimue reaches into Hellboy's chest and tears out his heart, killing him, and sending his spirit down to hell. The next major chapter, Hellboy in Hell, takes place right after. What happened when Nun Jihad broke free alone, and why didn't nukes stop it? Let's leave Hellboy in Hell for a second and move over to the BPRD side of the universe. Up until this point, the Ogdru Jahad have only ever tried to escape through proxies and vessels. Well, brace yourself because things are about to escalate. In the Hell on Earth storyline, one of the seven, later identified as Nun Jihad, gets loose from its crystal prison way ahead of schedule and physically crash lands on Earth, specifically in Argent, Kansas. This landing absolutely decimates the surrounding region for miles in every direction. An Ogdru Jahad has landed, in Kansas of all places, and it immediately starts doing what its kind does best, spawning Ogdru Hem by the dozen. Both the BPRD and a Russian paranormal agency called the SSS scramble to respond. Even agents like Liz Sherman and Johann Kraus, who are borderline supernatural and immensely powerful in their own rights, can burn down the Ogdru Hem all day long, but they can't even scratch the dragon itself. The arrival of Nun Jihad is tied to a psychic network powering a villain called the Black Flame, and once the Black Flame is killed, well, the leash is off. Nun Jihad stops sitting still, and as it moves, it actively brings storms of fire and lightning, all the while vomiting out more and more Ogdru Hem every hour. So the United States military does what it always does in apocalyptic stories. It goes for the nuclear option. They fire every available warhead directly at Nun Jihad, but the beast walks out of the blast completely unscathed. I mean, they don't even slow it down. It's one of the great "you cannot win this" moments in comic history. No kind of human firepower can stop or solve this. Nun Jihad then destroys BPRD headquarters with a single fireball, killing beloved veteran agents Kate Corrigan and Panya, and it even annihilates a group of Watchers sent up from Hell to try and stop it. It's not a weapon that finally ends the threat, it's the sacrifice of Johann Kraus. You know, the ectoplasmic spirit in a containment suit. He channels the full, raw power of an ancient energy called Vril and uses it to shatter Nun Jihad and banish its remains into the void. Sadly, this also costs Johann his own soul, and he's completely consumed. R.I.P. Agent Kraus, but hey, it worked. Also, in that exact same moment that Nun Jihad dies, every Ogdru Hem on the entire planet goes suddenly still, and it's eerie as hell, but at least it gives this battered world one brief moment of rest. How were the remaining Ogdru Jahad finally destroyed? Nun Jihad's death is no kind of resolution because there are still 6 other Ogdru Jahad out there. And I mean, the spirit of the dead Nun Jihad isn't finished either. It, along with the spirits of the living 6, flows into a revived Rasputin. Through him, they reanimate every Ogdru Hem on Earth at once, and just when you think this is the apocalypse finally happening, Hellboy, kinda sorta resurrected from hell, which is a whole other story, kills Rasputin at last, and for good this time, ending the century-long partnership between the Mad Monk and his dragon. The final checkmate comes later from an unexpected direction, a secret society called the Osiris Club. They figure out how to harness the power of the right hand of doom, but they don't use it to open the prison, they use it to physically drag the prison to Earth. They pull the crystal prison holding the 6 remaining Ogdru Jahad out of the abyss and hurl it down onto the Earth like a falling asteroid. The impact is cataclysmic. It wipes out both the 6 remaining Ogdru Jahad and the Ogdru Hem that, by this point in the timeline, had overrun humanity and come to rule the ruined planet. Afterwards, the Osiris Club makes its play for godhood. The dead dragon's power is absorbed into the hand, and the club begins siphoning that unfathomable power so they can become gods themselves. That's when Hellboy, now a ghost operating from beyond death, intervenes one final time. He reclaims the right hand of doom, turns it against the Osiris Club, and destroys them. The 6 remaining Ogdru Jahad had already died in the impact, and after literally eons of rituals and wars and near misses, the 7 gods of chaos were finally gone. But Mignola leaves us with a strangely beautiful and deeply unsettling denouement. Even further in the future, 1,000 years later, on a reborn Earth that resembles its primordial days, we find that the Ogdru Jahad are still remembered, but not as destroyers. They're remembered as benevolent creator gods called the Ogdru Hesh and worshipped as the beings who gave birth to a whole new race called the Bonji. This is kind of a mind because were they really the villains, or were they just creators doing what creators always do, and they were seen as monsters only by the things they hadn't made? The series refuses to answer, which brings us to the biggest question of all. What do the Ogdru Jahad actually want? So the main overarching mystery of this universe is that no one actually knows what the Ogdru Jahad want. Their nature is so far beyond human comprehension that we can't even say for sure whether they're 7 separate beings or one entity expressed through 7 bodies. Every single character who worships or fears them has arrived at a completely different theory, and Mignola just never once tells you who's right. You know what that means. It's theory time, and we've got a bunch of them. Hermann von Klempt believed the Ogdru Jahad would only be released after their Hem children had finished the job of destroying mankind, the parents coming to a world already cleared and prepped for arrival. Some alien observers of their prison considered that the Earth itself was somehow necessary to maintaining the seal, meaning the Ogdru Jahad's release would first destroy the Earth and then unravel the rest of the universe. Rasputin, meanwhile, believed something that was oddly hopeful. Their goal was to burn away the corrupt old world and build a new one that would be perfect and populated by a final race of man with him as its prophet. Figures like Hecate and the fairy Daon Sedai had a much simpler version that humanity would just be replaced by a new race, which brings us back to those flawed frog monster experiments. Even if they disagree on everything else, there's one thing that every theory agrees on. No matter what, the release of the Ogdru Jahad annihilates the Earth and ends humanity. Sure, they can't agree on what will rise after that destruction, but they know for sure there will be destruction. I can't believe it's taken so long, but all of this has a very deliberate literary foundation. Mignola modeled the Ogdru Jahad explicitly on H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, especially its great old ones. You know, those vast, indifferent cosmic entities whose motives are simply unknowable to our tiny human minds? Yeah, those guys. So add a Lovecraftian, mysterious vibe to the seven-headed dragon from the Book of Revelation, you know, just combining literary cosmic horror with ancient scripture, and voila, you've got the Ogdru Jahad. This fusion is exactly why they work so well. They're apocalyptic in the biblical sense and unknowable in the Lovecraftian sense all at once, and it's just flat out terrifying in every way. How did the 2004 film reimagine them? We're going to end with the adaptation today, which I genuinely love, and there's also some really fascinating production lore here too. As we already mentioned, Mignola had kept the Ogdru Jahad's comic book appearance hidden for many years, which means that Guillermo del Toro's 2004 Hellboy film was actually the first time anyone had to design what the creatures inside the crystal prisons truly looked like. And that means, yep, the movie beat the comics to the big reveal. The design was the work of legendary creature artist Wayne Barlow, working alongside Mignola and Del Toro. Barlow's concept art leaned hard into strange alien organs and coiling, twisting limbs. It's super uncomfortable to look at, which is exactly how it should be. Sculptor Hiroshi Katagiri then built a small-scale maquette, which in its first version still had gangly, almost human-like arms. Del Toro took one look and replaced those arms with mantis-like appendages, specifically to remove any hint of humanity at all. The result was far more cephalopod-like with tentacles, and it looked a lot more like a Lovecraftian creature than the stocky dinosaur-like design Mignola would later reveal in the books. Two totally different visions of the same gods, and somehow both work in their respective continuities. In the film, Rasputin, Ilsa, and the clockwork assassin Cronin manipulate Hellboy into using the right hand of doom to open a portal during a solar eclipse. Hellboy very nearly does it too, before Agent John Myers snaps him back to himself at the last second, and Hellboy chooses to reseal the seven gods of chaos instead of freeing them. One offspring, called Behemoth, emerges from Rasputin afterwards, and Hellboy kills it. It's a cinematic oversimplification of the comic's entire premise. The key is held by the demonic hero, but he refuses to turn it. Also, fun fact, the animated film, Hellboy Sword of Storms, has an uncredited cameo of dragon-like beings referred to only as the Dragons, which may be Ogdru Jahad or Ogdru Hem or something completely different. It's never actually been confirmed. So there you have it. Seven gods born from mud and fire, their creator executed by the very watchers who helped create them, sealed away by a hand that millennia later would end up attached to the arm of the one hero who could stop them. Rasputin tried to free them with an army at his back, Nimue tried it with her own body as the door, and Nun Jihad tried it completely alone, not stopped even by nuclear weapons. Every single attempt changed the world a little more, but not completely, because the key that was supposed to end everything chose not to turn the lock over and over and over again. Honestly, the story of the Ogdru Jahad is somehow insane and simple at the same time, and the best part is, even after everything we've learned about them, they remain inherently unknowable. So who has theories about what the Ogdru Jahad actually want? Do you see them as villains or creators or both? And which powerful cosmic entity do you want us to examine next? Let us know in the comment section down below, but in the meantime, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time.